Hey everyone, Sumo Spiffy here. The Banzuke's out, which means it's tier list time. This one's based around the method I introduced in the prediction video. So, will I be a genius or an idiot? That seemed like a moment to say, you decide, but we're gonna find out in a few weeks anyway, so it's not really up to us. Anyway, tier list, go! S tier. Onosato's all we've got here. Looking through the joy, Hoshoryu's the only guy who gives him real problems. Takayasu and, for whatever reason, Abi have also fought him tough. But even if not every other match looks like a blowout, combine the fact he's a favorite to some degree against basically everyone else, and that 4 of his 6 fellow Sanyaku are dealing with injury woes, and it's hard not to view Big Beer as the tournament favorite yet again. Skipping down to A injury tier, and now we have Hoshoryu. The Yokozuna is an injury tier, of course, due to the unknown status of his elbow, but he's at A tier instead of S because I can't get that last fight in March against Ichiyamamoto out of my head. The difference between S tier and A tier Hoshoryu is that S tier uses throws without relying on them, whereas A tier uses them reflexively and simply too often. That's what happened against Ichi, a desperate throw attempt from a guy who didn't seem to know what else to do. If he's healthy, he might revert back to his S tier version, but he might also need time to find that groove again. So A tier for now. Sliding back up to A injury tier is good old Takayasu. This is a slightly kind rating because I doubt he'll replicate last Basho even if he maintains his health yet again. But he has several good or pretty good matchups, whereas Kirishima's the only probable opponent who's been an issue historically. Daieisho's also been tough, and of course Onosato's always there, but even mostly healthy, he should be able to bag 9 wins. Fully healthy again, 10 or even 11 might happen, even if I don't think he'll land in another playoff. Our top B tier pick is Aonishiki. He has a minimal track record against his probable opponents, but in a lot of cases, you can picture those matchups and still see him as a definite favorite. I'll talk about this in the breakdown next week, but in short, he's working on his vulnerabilities and is simply a tough out for just about everyone around him. The potential volatility in someone's record when they have so little experience against their opponents means expecting 2 wins is too optimistic, but at the same time, 8 would be surprisingly low. The next B tier is Takerufuji. He's shown some vulnerability of late, especially against higher level opposition, which might be a little scary for fans now that he's in the joy. Hoshoryu, Tamawashi, and Onosato have all been tough, and he has fewer really good matchups than you might expect. Still, if he struggles, he'll most likely have opportunities to fight down in rank, which should make up for any shortfall against the Sanyaku and leave him with a winning record. Tobizaru. The Scandal Monkey spent 2 full years in and around the joy, largely on the strength of consistent 6 to 8 win bashos that kept him hovering from Maegashira 1 through 4. After a 5-10 last September and 2 straight losing bashos this year, I'm a little concerned he's falling off a bit. But if he is, it's just a bit, and his expected matchups in May are overall fantastic. Hakuoho and Midorifuji have proven tough for him, and I'm sure Aonishiki will be an issue as well, but he's at least a small favorite against the other 7 opponents I have him slated to fight. And if the joy gets locked in against each other, then if he struggles initially, he may get to fight even further down in rank. Short of a physical implosion, Tobi's well set up for a Kachikoshi. Onokatsu. I debated myself for a while over whether to place Onokatsu at B or high C+. He has almost no track record against his prospective opponents, which means more potential volatility in his results. However, nobody on his dance card has a clear advantage over him, whereas he's won his last couple over Midorifuji and has a good track record against Hakuoho. Plus, like Tobizaru, if he's 50-50 over his first 10 matches, he'll probably see more opponents from lower ranks than higher ones. He's not Aonishiki level, where I expect him to win a lot of matches regardless of never having seen these guys, but his consistent improvement makes me expect 8 wins. B injury tier belongs solely to Kotozakura. I have to admit, I was a little surprised to see how many fights he's expected to have where he's an underdog. Kirishima's a nightmare, Takerufuji and Takayasu are problems, and he's 50-50 against Onosato when healthy, which he very well may not be. Still, as you'd expect from an Ozeki, he has a lot of solid matchups, and his knee seemed to improve in March. Barring a health setback, he should avoid going Kataban again if nothing else. On the high end of C+ are 3 guys I also considered for B tier. Daieisho, Wakatakakage, and Wakamotoharu. I fully expect at least 2 of them to finish with winning records, and probably all 3. However, their schedules are just difficult enough that I can't consider those winning records a given. On the plus side, all of them are rock solid against the Oho, Abi, Gonoyama, and Tamawashi group. On the minus side, the only Sanyaku opponent any of them can be considered favorites against is Daieisho against Takayasu. Even amongst the 3 of them, Daieisho's 50-50 against both Wakas, and of course, the Wakas benefit from not having to face each other. The main benefit for all 3 is that they only have 6 Sanyaku matches, and they're no worse than 50-50 against probably anyone in Maegashira. I expect all of them to land at 8-7 or 9-6, but we've seen strange outcomes with all 3 in the past, which makes 7-8 at least plausible for any of them. Next, believe it or not, is Roga. As middling as Roga has been in the past, this time I nearly placed him at B tier as well. His matchups are absolutely outstanding. Outside of Sadanoumi, the only guy who's been an issue for him in the past is Shonanoumi, and at this point we know we can't trust that Shonanoumi will be functional against any given opponent. But Roga has a great history against Tochitaikai, Nishikigi, Ryuden, and Tokihayate, and even though Tochitaikai just won their only recent fight, overall that's probably good for him too. He's taken 2 straight against Kotoshoho, won his first match against Kayo, and is no worse than 50-50 against Asakoryu. And although his opponents will get higher in rank as the basho goes on, he has some decent matchups in the mid ranks too. In the past, he's been prone to just doing dumb shit here and there and throwing matches he shouldn't lose, and maybe that'll happen again. But there are 10 other guys from rank 13 down, and I'll be surprised if he loses to 4 of them. He could finish 7-8, but it'll be a genuine disappointment if he does. I mean, he could actually be a good Kachi Clash pick. Who expected that? Sliding in just behind these guys is Hakuoho. At a glance, he should be B tier or close to it. After all, he keeps churning up the ranks, consistently getting his wins, even if he winds up with an unexpected loss or 2. But his neighborhood in this basho looks pretty tough. Tobizaru's the only one he's shown clear superiority over. Onokatsu, Kinbozan, and even Chiyoshoma have all proven dangerous. He split fights with Meisei and Oshoma, and Churanoumi won their only recent fight. Even giving him even odds against Aonishiki, which is probably a little friendly, and figuring him as a small favorite over Ura, that looks like a rough start. I still like Hakuoho to reach 8 wins because a rough start should keep his schedule either outside the Joy or against struggle busters in the Joy, and in that case, he'll do some work. From here, I have the tier sorted by rank, with these Rikishi towards the back end of C+. Oshoma, like others in his neighborhood, has some difficult matches to start, but should benefit as he dips lower for opponents. He's especially good against Midorifuji and Shodai, which should help him catch up from a slow start. Meisei's an interesting case. He's done quite poorly against Endo and not great against Atamifuji, but injuries could make those 2 more vulnerable. On the other hand, he's outstanding against Takanosho, but if we get mid-rank Takanosho instead of Maegashira 3 Takanosho, maybe that's not such a gimme. On the whole, I expect he'll start around a 50% win rate, and then his fate will depend on whoever the schedule makers give him near the end. I see a little more in the way of positive matchups than negative ones, but this is a classic single-digit prediction. Whatever happens, he'll end up with single-digit wins and losses. Shishi. The twerk master's putting things together slowly but surely. I think in this go-round, he'll benefit from being ranked in that liminal space where up-and-comers and fading veterans meet. His 2 worst probable matchups, Atamifuji and Meisei, aren't that bad, and are both against opponents who could fade due to injury issues. He should face both of them early enough for that to be unlikely, but it's possible. The trickiness of this prediction is that at rank 11, he could potentially swing up or down in rank for opponents later on. He's already likely facing Aonishiki, add Hakuoho and Onokatsu to the mix, and that Kachikoshi looks a lot further away. Still, he'll most likely fight down in rank to some degree, and might even benefit from low-ranked opponents with poor records getting fed to him because they have no one else to fight. Takanosho. I got genuinely excited when I saw Takanosho's likely lineup because it looks great for him, but I can never forget his bad knee, and that makes him a very swingy pick. If he's fitter than Atamifuji, Endo, Sadanoumi, and Shodai, I think he beats all 4 of them. After that, even going 2-3 against the rest of his 9 expected opponents puts him at 6-3 and in great shape. I said Roga might be a good Kachi Clash pick because his expected schedule looks like he should definitely do pretty well. Takanosho could absolutely pop off, but he's also capable of physically struggling in any given basho. I think 7 and 8 is a worst case scenario here, but I also think it's more likely for him than for Roga. But for me, they're the two best Kachi Clash options in the bottom bracket. And Kotoshoho. If you don't like Roga or Takanosho, Kotoshoho might not be a terrible pick. He also has a relatively favorable lineup, although outside of dominating Tamashoho, he doesn't look like a significant favorite or underdog in any of his fights. Thus, even though Koto can do a lot of work down here when he's in flow, expecting big things is a sketchy proposition. Still, 8 and 7 is quite doable. C- starts with Asakoryu. I kind of figured I'd have him at this tier, but not at the top of it. Given everyone else at the bottom of the division though, if he doesn't get a Kachikoshi this time, I don't know what it's gonna take. He's 6-0 combined against Tamashoho, Kayo, and Ryuden, and won 2 straight against Tochitaikai. Shononoumi's his only near certain opponent who he struggled with, and it's Shononoumi. The unknowns are where the dilemma lies. He has 1 loss to Kotoshoho and no matches against Nishikigi, Roga, and Kusano, his probable Juryo opponent. None of those look like good fights. Still, 5 and 4 for those 9 fights is doable. He has decent potential matchups sitting in ranks 10 through 13, and if he gets a second Juryo opponent, that should be good for him as well. I have him at C- because another 6 and 9 is more likely than a 9 and 6, but it would still be disappointing to see. With just about the polar opposite of Asakoryu situation is Oho. Falling from Sekiwake to Maegashira 1 West, Oho is positioned to snatch his spot in the Sanyaku back, but he's gonna have to put in some serious work to get there. His lone good expected matchup is against Abi, who he's beaten 4 straight. He largely alternates wins with Daieisho, Kirishima, and Hiradoumi. He hasn't faced Tamawashi in 3 years, so that one may well go to whoever's on more of a roll. He's never faced Takerufuji, but having beat Onosato twice, you figure he has a decent chance there, but one good matchup and a bunch of coin flips is not the thing successful bashos are usually made of. What makes a Kachikoshi plausible, if not especially likely, is that on top of the coin flips, he's proven capable of beating the Yokozuna and both Ozeki, even if he remains an underdog in those matches. He could win more than his fair share of those. Plus, if he at least keeps his record around 50-50, he should be a genuine favorite against plenty of lower ranked opponents, which might also push him to 8 wins. So it's not hopeless, but there's a lot more downside than upside here. And midway between Oho and Asakoryu, we have Kinbozan. Even though he fell away from the Joy border, this could be tough sledding for Kinbo. Oshoma's beaten him 3 straight, as have Meisei and Chiyoshoma, though matches with the latter two stretch back a couple of years. He's never beaten Tobizaru either. He's 2-0 against Hakuoho, but that doesn't seem like a matchup where the 0 will stick forever. Splitting matches with Aonishiki and Onokatsu will probably be a good outcome. Midorifuji's the one guy he should be a clear favorite against, but that doesn't counterbalance the rest. However, at rank 8, if he struggles early, he'll probably have more opponents towards the bottom of the division as the basho goes on. As always, it depends on who he gets, but broadly speaking, that should help. But this could be one of those bashos where he starts like 3 and 7 or 4 and 6, then runs through easier opponents to finish 7 and 8 or even 8 and 7 and make it look respectable. Ichiyamamoto. Ichiyamamoto stays at 4 West, and the question is, was his 7 and 8 a fluke, or can he actually hang in this neighborhood and maybe even move up? March was a little fluky in that he got to face the worst Hoshoryu and a still vulnerable Kotozakura, but hey, you still gotta win those fights. But the rest of the Sanyaku aced him, and it doesn't look like that group will be any easier this time around. That being said, he hasn't been that bad against most of this Sanyaku. He has an excellent track record against Hiradoumi and Oshoma, and plenty of 50-50s which could potentially springboard him to 8 wins. But the path is thin, especially with Ura and Takerufuji looking ready to blast him early days. Chiyoshoma. Yeah, I know, Chiyo absolutely ran it at 5 West in January, so plonking him in C- now that he's back there has to be a hater move. The problem is, in January, he wildly outperformed expectations against his Maegashira schedule, and that's not something you can count on happening twice. This time, his worst matchups against Tobizaru, Onokatsu, and presumably Aonishiki look quite a bit more bad than his best matchups look good. He'll be a heavy underdog in basically any Sanyaku match, and if he goes against some of the higher Maegashira wrestlers, which is likely if he and they are both struggling, he doesn't have a great track record against them either. He's shown a new level compared to even a year ago, so I won't entirely count out a winning record, but he is not set up to succeed here. Churanoumi. Another placement that could look like I'm sipping on haterade, but this one's even easier to explain. His only good matchup is Meisei, and maybe Shodai if that fight happens. Against the rest, he's either not done well, or we're talking about guys like Hakuoho and Onokatsu, against whom he has no recent fights but has to realistically be the underdog. Even Aonishiki, who he beat at the start of March, is realistically a favorite over him. If he fights everyone from Ichiyamamoto to Shodai and goes 5-5, that's gonna be pretty good. 6-4 would be a big win. Like most of these mid-rankers, he could make up for a mediocre start with lower ranked opponents, but at Maegashira 7, it's iffy which direction the schedule makers will go. Midorifuji. I really don't like putting Midori here all the time. Even not having to face Hakuoho though, he's in a bit of a meat grinder. Kinbozan, Onokatsu, and Aonishiki, and potentially Oshoma are tough fights. Shishi's especially good against smaller opponents. Midori does quite well against Endo, and he probably has the edge on Tobizaru, but even his long-term advantage against Churanoumi has slid away of late. At rank 9, it's much more likely he'll see lower-ranked opponents later, especially if he's not doing well, so I don't think this will be a disaster basho, but the odds are not with him here. Shodai. I fully expect Shodai to do Shodai things here. He has literally 0 good matchups against his 10 most likely opponents from Churanoumi down through Takanosho. So watch what should be like a 3-7 start end up 5-5 or 6-4, but then he craters against everyone else and finishes 7-8 anyway. Playing the numbers though, this one looks real bad for the Dark Lord. I expect he'll find some lesser opponents to overpower near the end, but that's likely to be a consolation prize. Tokihayate. I really hoped I would have reason to plonk Toki higher than this, but even though his prospective lineup doesn't look quite as disastrous as Shodai's, it's not good. Roga and Shishi are healthy as far as I know and have him pretty locked down, whereas Ryuden's the only one I absolutely expect him to beat. In fact, opponent health may wind up mattering quite a bit. Takanosho, Atamifuji, and Endo are all potentially vulnerable if they're not in good fighting shape. Unfortunately, he should get at least the first 2 fairly early when they're less likely to be physically struggling. Being very good against Tochitaikai and Tochitaikai may also help push him to 8 wins if he gets those fights, but that's a lot to hope for. Kayo. To be perfectly honest, Kayo's not in D tier because he has so little history with almost anyone he's going to fight that a wide array of outcomes are possible. Unfortunately, what history exists against Asakoryu and Tochitaikai is quite bad. I'm only holding out a thin thread of hope because Kayo's a big boy who can get rolling in a big way, but this is probably going to be a learning experience he can take back to Juryo. And Tochitaikai. For a guy who spent less than a year in Juryo before making it to Makuuchi, Tochitaikai has a pretty decent set of matchups waiting for him. Roga whoops him, and Asakoryu's tough, but he does well against Tochitaikai and Kayo, and everyone else waiting for him is a veteran with the potential to physically implode. This looks like a situation where, even if he started like 7-2, he'd probably finish 9-6, so the odds of a winning record are still pretty low. But if he starts feeling himself and gets the right opponents, it could happen. Sadanoumi. I want to believe, but there are too many reasons not to. Sada's done quite well against Roga, but there are a lot of struggle bus rides outside of that. And if Roga took those Juryo steroids a lot of guys seem to get when they're briefly demoted, this fight might be that much harder. Maybe Shonanoumi will be his ultimate disaster self, and Takanosho's leg won't work, and Atamifuji won't be able to put up a fight. But I have Sadanoumi going approximately 3-6 against his probable opponents, and it's only the potential for opponent health issues that makes a winning record seem even slightly plausible. C injury tier includes some unfortunate regulars. Kirishima hurt his back recently. Apparently, he said it's the first time he's dealt with a back injury, so I'm guessing it's his lower back as opposed to his upper back when his neck was also hurt. Endo was pretty messed up last basho, even though I'm not aware of any specifics as to what was wrong. He has some excellent matchups this time, so he could do reasonably well if he's recovered. Atamifuji hits injury tier yet again, where he'll stay until we figure out what his new baseline is. I had hoped the arthritis in his hip was just a medical diagnosis and wouldn't significantly impact him yet, but going from 4-2 to 6-9 is at least one piece of evidence it's hurting him now. I have all of them at C+ if reasonably healthy, but how likely that is varies substantially. And Abi was obviously busted up for the last half to 2/3 of March. Like Endo, we'll just need to see where he's at. Unlike Endo, unfortunately, his schedule looks extremely difficult. Hoshoryu, of all people, is the only opponent he's had significant recent success against, and you can't ever lock in someone to beat the Yokozuna before the Basho starts. Even in pretty good shape, he's looking like a C- pick. If he's not healthy, this could go very wrong very quickly. Now for D tier. Ura. Someone commented that Ura simply owns the number 16 spot on the Banzuke, and another 7 and 8 would potentially keep him there for yet another Basho, but even that looks like a reach. The only guy he should see in the first 2/3 or so of the Basho who he beats on the regular is Ichiyamamoto. Maybe he can get back to his winning ways from a few years ago against Chiyoshoma, and maybe he calls heads against Oshoma and Hiradoumi. Even then, despite some recent wins against the current Sanyaku, there's no one in that group he's legit good against, and at Maegashira, he's staring down Takerufuji, Tobizaru, and Hakuoho, and a small chance of Onokatsu instead of Hiradoumi as well. When Ura made Komusubi, it took a miracle run from 3-7 to 8-7. That at least had some other struggling opponents in his lineup because he started so poorly. This time, the Maegashira he should face over the first week look rough, and then the Sanyaku follows that up. I don't know how he can get 8 wins here. Gonoyama. Gonoyama has this habit of pulling out wins you never see coming, but then spending the rest of the Basho proving he wasn't any better than we thought. He's surprisingly pretty good against Kirishima, but any better than 2-5 against the Sanyaku as a whole is a win. That would be fine if he had strong matchups against the rest of the Joy, and in fact, it's not terrible for him. He stomps Oho and does well against Abi and Tamawashi. But Wakamotoharu beats him sideways, Hiradoumi fights him tough, and all in all, he needs everything to go right just to reach 8-7. Maybe this time we'll discover he's leveled up, but it's always maybe this time. Ryuden. Good news! Ryuden is set up to get absolutely smashed. At 15 East, he might get a Juryo fight. Most likely this will be against Nishikifuji or Mitakeumi, both of whom he does quite well against. I bring this up because it's literally his only good expected or even semi-expected matchup. He'll probably find ways to sneak out wins against 1 or 2 of the Juryo promotees, but he's quite bad against Asakoryu, Roga, Tokihayate, and if the fight happens, Takanosho. That's a lot of fights to be a big underdog in, especially for someone on the fade. And then the rest of the Basho is fighting up in rank. This looks like another 6-9 waiting to happen. Tochitaikai. Given how brand new Makuuchi guys often get smacked down to Juryo, then come back up and do better later, it's odd that Tochitaikai the one promotee in D tier, but his matches are awful. He'll probably face Hiradoumi from Juryo at some point, but after that, there's not much good to look at. Maybe he can beat Nishikigi again like he did in January, and maybe Ryuden's enough of a shambles that he gets that win, but even a 5-4 start will be a miracle, and then he fights up in rank. It looks very bad for the coffee shop manager. Our final 2 D tiers are Tamawashi and Hiradoumi. These are a couple guys who I enjoy watching, especially when they're doing well, but it will be a lot less fun this time. Between the two of them, Tamawashi has a clear edge, and he's been quite a test for Takerufuji as well. Just about everyone else up here beats his ass though, and the last 2 trips he made to the Joy resulted in a total of 5 wins. It's quite possible Hiradoumi will do better, but his prospective lineup is even worse. He's very good against Abi and solid against Gonoyama. That's it. He's a genuine underdog to almost everyone else by the numbers. Plus, one of the few where the stats have it 50-50 is Takerufuji, and that hardly seems like an even matchup either. It's quite likely Hiradoumi will pull a couple of surprises, and the way things are laid out, pretty much all the surprises he can have are good. But he's staring down a long road to 8 wins. And finally, as promised, the return of What the F tier. This is where Shonanoumi is his most frustrating. Everything is lined up for him to do phenomenally well. For whatever reason, he struggles against Nishikigi, but he does well against almost everyone else he's expected to fight. In fact, two of the guys he hasn't faced are Tochitaikai and Kayo, who by all rights he should also be favored against. If his body shows up all 15 days, he's B tier minimum. Hell, he'd probably contend for the Yusho, but I don't know if that's possible. Even in his recent 8 and 7s, he had stretches where everything switched off. I'd say I'm curious about what'll happen, but at this point, it's more sad. As for Nishikigi, he's said sometimes he drinks too much, and you gotta figure maybe he'll cut back now that he's at the bottom of the division. What are the odds at this point though? All I know is, looking at Kayo, Tamashoho, Asakoryu, and Tochitaikai, he could go 4-0 against him in a good state or 0-4 in a bad one. So I'm just gonna assume he'll go 2-2 there. He has a couple other relatively difficult matchups, so even in a good state I just have him at C+, but as always, 10-5 and 5-10 are both possible, and I have no idea which one is coming. And that's the tier list for Natsu 2025. Aonishiki breakdown next week. That's definitely all I'll have time for between now and then, so look for that, get ready for more sumo, and have a great day. I'll see you soon.